All right. Oh, hopefully I saved that. Oops. The old title must have just gone out. Oh well. That's fine. Let's get the posts up on Twitter up. Alrighty. Wait for my view to show up. Is Twitch alive? Twitch is alive. Okay. It's twitching. Okay. So yeah, I thought we would start, well, since I haven't recorded any React videos in quite a while now. I thought we would start with something like that. Um oh, I wonder if my audio is working where I can.
I want to say,
Yes. Oh my goodness. That's a little loud. Okay. Um so audio's working. Okay. So let's get started here. I wanted to start with the best one, most interesting one I think from this last week. Let's switch over to browser. All right, let's do a marker. Marker. You shouldn't tell kids to code. Start. So let's see if markers work. They didn't work before. Unrecognized command maker. That might be an issue. Markers work. Okay, awesome. All right. So this was one of the most interesting ones I saw from this week. Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, argues that we should stop saying kids should learn to code. He argues that the rise of AI means that we can replace programming languages with human language prompts, thus enabling everyone to be a programmer. AI will kill coding, he says. I'm just going to come out and say that I think he's wrong. But let's listen to what he has to say here.
I want to say something, and it's going to sound completely opposite of what people feel. Over the course of the last 10 years, 15 years, almost everybody who sits on a stage like this would tell you it is vital that your children learn computer science. Everybody.
Okay. It's vital that your children learn computer science. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's for everybody. But if you're interested in it, I mean, I don't want to stop anybody. But well, I
Learn
don't.
how to program. And in fact, it's almost exactly the opposite. It is our job to create computing technology such that nobody has to program and that the programming language is human. Everybody in the world is now a programmer. This is the miracle of artificial intelligence. The countries, the people that understand how to solve a domain problem in digital biology or in education.
That that point I do think is interesting. I think there is something important about unlocking all the knowledge, the domain specific knowledge in those fields. I think he's right in that aspect. But the idea that no one should know how to code anymore is kind of wild to me. Partially because I'm a software developer. I spent a lot of time learning how to do this, so that makes sense. But also because they're looking to make English the programming language of choice. And that's odd to me. Like English is a very imprecise way to program computers. It's actually quite ambiguous when you try to like you might think it's, oh, I can get code out of a computer so much easier with my words, but the ambiguity that you can get there is much greater. I don't agree that it's good for code. It might be good for exploration, but I don't agree that it's good for production things. Maybe I think the place where it's going to be most useful is in like research, like writing research code. But even then, like, do you trust what the LLMs are throwing out? Do you trust that it's right? You might want a developer to go look over that. you you might want someone to make sure that whatever that AI wrote is right. So I don't know, but let's hear him out the rest of the way.
People, or in manufacturing, or in farming, those people who understand domain expertise now can utilize technology that is readily available to you. You now have a computer that will do what you tell it to do. It is
I think
vital
that
that we
element is
upskill
cool.
everyone, and the upskilling process, I believe, will be delightful, surprising. I want to say something, and it's
Is that upskilling though? Like learning how to interface with an LLM, that's not upskilling. That's not improving. It's not adding skills to your repertoire. Unless he's talking about upskilling the AI. I could see that's possible. But upskilling the person because of the LLM. I don't think that LLMs are good for learning. If you're using an LLM in a directed manner, you're using it to accomplish a goal. Often, I don't think people are, and this is all anecdotal. I have no. This is all just feel. But personally, when I use it, I don't really double check the code that like GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 gets me. I don't go double check it until I run it. And then I find out that it's wrong once I run it. And then I have to go back and fix it. And now I've left the flow, like, I've left the context of that code. So now I've got to go back in and read it and debug it. I think debugging code is going to be the killer skill for at least the next 10, 20 years based on this current arc of AI that we're on. The transformer style GPT large language models are only going to get us so far. I think in order to get to the next step in AI, I think we're going to need something more. I'm not sure we want something more, but I think it's going to require something more. So I don't see the need for developers going down anytime soon. And it really it's interesting. This is another aspect that I find interesting. NVIDIA, who employs how many programmers, is saying this. You're shooting yourself in the foot, aren't you? Like, don't you want people to be coders? Don't you want them to grow up coding? Because the things you're building run code. And someone's got to at least read the code at some point. So, and you're going to hire developers in the future. There's no way that they're going to replace some of these, like a senior NVIDIA developer. Do you think they're going to replace that with an LLM anytime soon? I don't see it. I think it's almost insulting to say that they will. I just it's not going to happen. I mean, I'm sure the C-suite would love it, but I don't think they would love the result. So I just it's a really weird statement to me. I don't get it. And maybe it does have something to do with their own LLM. I haven't tried it yet. But they've got like a star coder based local LLM that runs on graphics cards, so they'll sell more graphics cards, which is cool and all. But Ollama can do the same thing with plugins in VS Code and NeoVim. So I don't. And it can do it with more than one model. So NVIDIA's solution may be easier to set up. That'll probably be the feature there. But I just maybe that and this announcement are somehow related, but I don't see the 4D chess being played here. Either this was just a really dumb comment, or there is some 4D chess play going on in the background, but I don't know. But in reality, like based on current world events, based on current trajectories, unless he knows something we don't, which is entirely possible, I think everybody who wants to learn to code should learn to code. I don't think there's anything that should stop you. I think there's plenty of jobs on the market right now, and I don't see those going away anytime soon. And hey, that's just my opinion, but I just don't see it. I mean, developers are not in the same position as like a lot of people. I've seen the comparison made to like cars and horses. Developers aren't horses yet, at least. There's nothing indicating to me that we're outmoded quite yet. So I don't know. We'll see. Hey, if you liked this, please leave a thumbs up below. Maybe leave a comment telling me why I'm wrong. And have a good one. Ah, it's not working because I said it wrong. There we go. Alrighty. That's a short one. That's a good 10-minute video. 9-10 minute video. That should be a good one. I don't even think I have to edit anything out of that one. I think that one was good. So, where to next? So we're done with Jensen. What should we do? Okay, that one I already did. I had a duplicate for that one in here. Ooh, consider this article before switching to NeoVim. Yeah, this one might be good. Oh, it's medium. Is it gonna let me? Is it gonna let me? It's gonna let me read it. Okay, I can read this one at least. Okay. All right. Let's add a marker here. All right. Consider this article before switching to NeoVim. Let's consider it together. Why don't we? Consider this article before switching to NeoVim. Why and for what reason did you switch to NeoVim and VS Code? Okay. I'm an active Linux user, and my favorite IDEs are NeoVim and VS Code. I always recommend both NeoVim and VS Code to everyone, but I'm not saying that I never use VS Code anymore. I installed VS Code as my first IDE to write and run my first program. I, too, as a NeoVim user, still have VS Code installed for some odd things here and there, but let's go see what his reasoning for leaving it is. Or maybe his reasoning for not using it. We'll see. The current article is not a tutorial. It shares my journey about switching from VS Code to NeoVim and then back from NeoVim to VS Code. Oh, he went back. Well, that's interesting. Okay. With my story, in the end, your mind is also evident on whether you need to leave VS Code to start using NeoVim or stick with VS Code. Why did I give up on VS Code and start NeoVim? I switched to VS Code, and there is one reason, and that's performance. VS Code is slow. It takes too many resources, and sometimes the VS Code tab is stuck, and you need to close VS Code and reopen it. Yeah, I've experienced that. It lags hard sometimes, but you're running a whole operating system when you fire up oh my gosh, what's it called? An Electron window. You're firing up basically a whole operating system when you fire up Electron, a whole VM in your machine basically. But suppose you have a small or low RAM and storage machine or laptop. then VS Code is a nightmare for you, primarily when you work with large projects, especially in front end development. I will say I have never opened a project that has like brought VS Code to its knees. I the virtual scrolling works pretty well actually. I mean it's similar to Sublime Text virtual scroll. It works pretty well, and there's no like noticeable lag when I open super large files, whereas I have hit the buffer limit of NeoVim, like the length buffer limit. There's like an end limit to how many characters you can have in there, but I haven't run into that with VS Code, which is interesting. I wonder what the difference is in the data structures they're using, but maybe they're doing like virtual scrolling, not only up and down, but maybe to the side to side as well. That would be interesting. But anyway, a good example is when you work on large projects and your tech stack is based on React.js, TypeScript, Yarn, and NPM. I wouldn't use both of these at once. I would just pick one. One or the other. Whatever your team's using, use that. Is a nightmare for you. That is why I started looking for alternatives to the VS Code. That is why I started looking for alternatives to the VS Code. I found Vim and NeoVim to be good alternatives in terms of speed and performance. They take fewer resources, RAM, CPU, etc., than VS Code. They do, overall. But once you start getting into language servers, I've noticed that there's some element of, at least on the .NET side, and the TypeScript, JavaScript side, once you introduce a language server, your usage is similar. It's better. It's a lot better. But once you get 4 or 5 instances open, I mean, your computer's wrecked. Whereas, like, okay, you can get 2 or 3 with VS Code, and then your computer's wrecked. So, switching to VS Code to NeoVim is a challenging task. Everybody knows about it. VS Code gives you ease in terms of configuration, installation, and uses. In NeoVim, to configure, you need to learn one more language, Lua, which you will never use in another project. I mean, you probably should use Lua in more projects. It's pretty good. I didn't think I was gonna like it as much as I did. When I started configuring NeoVim, I thought, what is this? Why is it a scripting language? And then after some time, I was like, okay, you can do function. There's like callbacks and stuff that you can do, and it makes it so where you can just invoke things, and there's hooks all over the place where you can hook in functions to plugins and stuff, and like maybe invoke another plugin or go read a file or go make a network call. Even like you can do whatever you want in Lua. It really makes it to where it is the most customizable option. When you use something like VS Code, you need some sort of other plugin to go invoke that other thing, and that's got to be written in TypeScript or JavaScript and compiled to TypeScript or the other way around, whatever. So I think having the language which you configure the editor be the same language in which you write the plugins is kind of a powerful idea. I'm on board with that. After trying it out, I think it's good. I do think that JSON is used more places, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. It's better than XML for the most part, but I don't see why that would be a downside. But anyway, let's keep rolling here. So configuring everything else from scratch in NeoVim is time consuming, stressful, and a headache. Likely NeoVim community built frameworks like LazyVim, AstroVim, NVChad, LunarVim, etc. I have not tried any of these. I'm using the lazy.nvim package manager, but I'm not using any of the distributions quite yet. So we'll see. I may try them out later, but I've set it up on a server. I've set it up on 2 Windows machines, WSL, and the server was a Linux box, and then another Linux box, and another Linux box, and I haven't had issues. The biggest problem has been the language servers, and for the most part, Mason handles that for me, and so I don't have to worry about it too much. The friction of installing my config on a new machine is basically down to cloning the Git package, or the cloning the Git repo into the NeoVim config folder, and then running Vim, and then installing lazy.nvim. I think it even does that. I think I even have code in there to download it. I think that's what they recommended doing. That most package managers have that, but it just sets it up, and you just restart it a couple times, and it installs all its stuff. Tree Setter installs itself. Mason installs whatever you tell it to install by default. Like, it just, for the most part, once you have a config that works, like, you can take that config elsewhere. I will say, I have found that process of setting up the config and personalizing it, that took a good month. But I was also learning NeoVim at the time. Like, I tried to do the Vim motions thing first, added little bits to my NeoVim config because I was using the NeoVim plugin in VS Code, so I could build my NeoVim config as I was learning the motions. And then once I was ready, I basically cut off the VS Code part and just started using NeoVim proper. And then by that time, I had pretty much my whole config laid out already for me. Everything was working. So, using the NeoVim framework, you can configure NeoVim in less than 5 minutes. So the 5 minutes is a lot better than the month I took. I'll give them that. But there's probably a lot that you just didn't need in there. There's probably some performance differences. Granted, lazy makes that much better. Like, if you don't use the thing, lazy doesn't load it. So that's a great thing. That's probably why they built it the way they did. Why am I not recommending NeoVim to everyone? I, just right off the bat, before we read this, do not recommend NeoVim to everyone. I recommend it to people who feel like their code editing process is slow. To anyone who feels like they want to take their code editing to be more advanced, faster, if they have issues with their wrists, like, are your hands hurting? Like, I've like, these 3 fingers, after like a long day of work before I started using Vim, would start to tingle and go numb, and I was like dropping things. If you're starting to get some of that, and I'm too young for that, but if you're starting to get some of that, then it's time to probably consider Vim Motions to start. And then if you really like that, and you're having problems with maybe the editors and how tightly integrated they are, then you can move on to things like going to NeoVim proper. But I just, it's not for everybody. Like, the motions just don't make sense right off the bat, and if you don't have the time to invest in it right off the bat, then it's not going to work out for you. So I do agree, it's not for everyone. But I know everyone says NeoVim is not for beginners. Yes, I agree with that. I think you can, like, if you're a beginner and you're not good at typing at all, maybe starting with it is probably a good idea. Maybe. But setting it up, like, start with the motions. Don't start with the NeoVim the editor. That's a bad plan. But start with Vim motions in a code editor. That might actually be a good idea. So, yes, I agree with that. But the correct wording is for NeoVim. NeoVim is not for VS Code users. I discovered some major problems with NeoVim. The installation process, no plugin manager ecosystem. There are plugin managers. Lazy is one of them. No UI and dashboard. I consider that a plus. I don't need it. Dependency on third-party open source. So does VS Code. Hard to configure. Fair. Language configuration and support. If he's talking LSPs, that can get complicated sometimes. If you're just talking highlighting, that's not complicated at all. Tree Sitter. Once you install Tree Sitter, like this get the highlighting portion at least, and the like the tree parsing stuff, like that all just works. So, but let's go through these gripes he has one by one. Okay. The installation process is not one click. For example, in VS Code, you download the VS Code file and install it. In NeoVim first, you install Vim. But in NeoVim first, you need to install Vim. No, you don't. No, you don't need Vim. If you're gonna go NeoVim, you don't need Vim. This is just raw. Then you can install NeoVim on your laptop. For beginner developers, it's tricky and sometimes developers are confused. One thing I want to point out is that when you're installing it, I found better luck using the nightly than I did the stable version. The plugin compatibility was just better with the nightly. Your mileage may vary, but I've run on the nightly. I have run into a couple of issues, like Lua line is broken for me right now, but I haven't run into any showstoppers. So your mileage may vary, but that's what I'd recommend. No plugin manager ecosystem. NeoVim has no plugin ecosystem similar to VS Code or any other IDE. Installing any plugin in NeoVim is a challenging process. First, you need to install the plugin manager for NeoVim. Yeah. So, there is plugin management ecosystems because you have to install them. So, there's many plugin managers out there. I like Lazy and Vim. I started with Packer. I moved to the PKCR, but that was kind of slow because it didn't compile my stuff. But Lazy and Vim has been good. It's polished. It's nice. It works. But the plugin ecosystem is different from VS Code. VS Code has a central repository where you install plugins from, and that repository is owned and operated by Microsoft. It's kind of similar to an NPM or Cargo or crates.io or whatever, NuGet.org. It's similar to all of those. NeoVim takes the approach that Go does. All the plugins are Git repos. So you're not, while most of those plugins do live in GitHub, there's nothing specifically tying you to GitHub for pulling down plugins. You could go to GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you wanted. So you're not tied to one platform, which is nice. I like the fact that I can have that option, and I kind of like using Git for package management. It seems like this is the second time I've seen it done. I mean, Go being the first, and I've really liked them both times. I think that is the way for libraries. I think for at least for, well, I can't even say at least for interpreted languages because Go isn't interpreted, but I think it's a good strategy. I think Git is a good way to go. The next big problem is related to, did we go over that? We skipped some. But there is a problem in the market. Many plugin managers are available and developers are confused about which one to select. If you're lucky, you install the plugin manager according to your requirements. Use Lazy. I think you can use Plug too. Plug might be. The one to pick right now is lazy.nvim. It just is. Packer's gone. They're out of support, so that just really leaves Lazy and PKCR, and PKCR isn't finished. The next big problem is related to the plugin itself. The plugin installation is very tricky due to the number of plugin managers. Every plugin cannot support every plugin manager. I haven't run into NeoVim plugins that don't work in both Packer. I took an entire Packer setup, converted it to PCKR, or yeah, I think it's PCKR, not NVim. Converted it to that, which granted was supposed to be compatible, and then I converted that over to lazy.nvim, and all of them worked. all my plugins worked in both. Anything I needed anyway. I don't remember anything that didn't work when in that conversion process. So even though they don't tell you what to set up in there or how to set it up, it the the plugins should work. There should be a way to make them work. It may take a little bit of tinkering if it has a lot of hooks and stuff to set up. Maybe like you have to like do things in a little bit different of a way, but overall they should just work. In VS Code, the developer finds the plugin with the search bar and installs it with one click. Paste in code, restart your editor, or put it in the search bar, click download, restart your editor. It's the same. I don't see a whole lot of difference. One's a GUI, so it maybe feels a little bit better for most people. I think there is something comforting about a GUI. Like it really does at first anyway. A GUI makes you feel better. I don't know. It's just how that works. It's what most of the computing experience people have is in. So I think GUIs make you feel better. But I think if you sat down and you had a person who had never seen a GUI and never seen a terminal, and you did it with them, I don't think there would be as much of a difference as you think. I think there would be a small difference. I think the GUI would win out, at least for ease of use, in the long run. But I think that once you've learned the concepts, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters as much as people think. I think familiarity has a big aspect of it. That was my experience anyway. Like I came from the Visual Studio world, and that was all just really, really familiar to me. So that probably had something to do with it. No UI and dashboard. Every person or developer in 2023 depends on a dashboard or a UI. I don't know what you mean by a dashboard. Maybe like the file tree, file picker, or UI. NeoVim does not give you any dashboard or UI. If you need to install the plugin, you install to plug in. Oh my gosh, I can't read. If you need to install the plugin. If you need to install the plugin. There we go. The best example of this is the sidebar. It's an effortless functionality if you need that, or you need to install the NVim tree plugin. I did, when I first switched over, I put the NVim tree plugin in NeoVim. And then after a while, I realized once I had Harpoon and Telescope set up, I realized how little I used it. And I realized how cumbersome it was to swap over, pick my file, open it, and then worry about like buffers getting weird and stuff. It was way simpler to just get rid of it. And eventually I just yanked it out of my config, and I've been really happy ever since. I don't need it. It's a waste of space. It's distracting. If I need a tree finder, I have NetRW there with this, just like a single key press away, and then I can open, create, delete, whatever in NetRW. Like, it took a little bit of time to learn all the commands in NetRW, but again, once you do, it's way faster and it's as good or better. So NeoVim is a well-known IDE, but the truth is that NeoVim relies on third-party open source. Yes, it is third-party. NeoVim is open source, but it relies on other pieces to make that a coherent whole. Yes. For any extra functionality you require, such as a sidebar or search bar, you need to install a plugin. The plugin is a third-party open source project managed by an open source contributor. Yep. Sometimes one plugin depends on another plugin. Suppose something happens in one plugin that affects the entire ecosystem as well. You can get the same thing in VS Code. Like the same thing happens, like one plugin underneath breaks and the rest of the plugins break, and then you're just up a creek. I have dealt with many broken VS Code plugins. I think the only experience I've had that hasn't been as janky, I think NeoVim's been just a little bit better than VS Code, but believe it or not, the better one has been my experience installing plugins in Visual Studio. That still has weird crashes and causes your editor to lock up and your IDE to lock up. But I think those end up being more polished than VS Code, and NeoVim's more polished than VS Code is as well. I think VS Code plugins are really buggy. I'm restarting language servers constantly. I'm restarting plugins. I'm restarting my editor, reloading my window because weird things are happening. I was hitting all sorts of issues. So I mean, by the time I was in there and I was thinking about switching, I was like, a lot of people are saying it's a lot of configuring. I'm already debugging LSPs. I'm already viewing logs out of all this stuff and trying to figure out what's going on in both Visual Studio and VS Code. So I like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, you're gonna, once you outpace at least just the first layer of plugins, like you're already gonna be in that realm as well, in whatever editor you're gonna be in. So I don't think this is a great argument either. Hard to configure and install plugins and themes. Configuring NeoVim is a challenging task. You cannot start working with NeoVim after the installation is finished. For example, I mean, you can, you just won't have anything. For example, without prior knowledge, you can easily understand the basic functionality of toggling the sidebar, installing and removing plugin search bar in VS Code. In NeoVim's case, you must learn everything and configure it according to the requirements. I think the only reason that this is easy is because it's easy in other editors as well, and a lot of the things are the same. So it's just familiarity, which has value. Familiarity has value. So I won't discount that, but it's fine in both. In NeoVim's case, you must learn everything and configure it according to the requirements. Yep. I mean, you will learn more about how your editor works. You will learn a lot more about how LSPs work, how debug adapter protocol works. You'll learn how, I mean, you won't learn a ton, but you'll learn a little bit how like tree syntax parsing works, how the AST works with your tree. You can even get, you can go as deep as you want, but it won't hide those things from you, which can be helpful in certain places when you need to fix something. Having access to the thing really helps. Whereas in like VS Code, you might not get access to that thing's logs. I mean, it might just be going to some buffer somewhere in memory and you might not get it. Lack of language server support, especially for non-famous languages, for example, handlebars, etc. There's no handlebar. Okay. There's no handlebars one. Mason handlebars. There's a linter for handlebars. Glint. Set of tools. Oh, that's the Glimmer VM. Oh, that's the that's gonna be oh my gosh. Embers, I think. Yeah, so there's a linter that supports it, and then there's Glint. I bet there's a way to set up handlebars in Tree Sitter. I bet there's support for it. You probably have to map the file type in your config, but outside of that, I bet it just works. So we'll see what else we got here. If language server is available for NeoVim, then configuring the language server in NeoVim is a challenging task, especially if you're new to NeoVim. Not with LSP0 and Mason. Like, it's not hard. It's like you type that list I just showed you. You search for your language server, you install it, and then you go. Like, uh, and if it doesn't work out of that, maybe there's some little config stuff you have to put in your LSP config. It's usually like 5 or 6 lines, and then that's it. So I don't think it's not a huge deal either. Which one should you choose, NeoVim or VS Code? For new developers, I'm always recommending to go with VS Code. But if your laptop has low RAM CPU power, for example, 2 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes RAM, I strongly recommend using NeoVim with NVChat or LazyVim in that case. I don't agree with that. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Like, you can get NeoVim to use tons of memory and tons of CPU too if you really want to. Like, if you're installing all the same plugins that you need, I mean, you'll end up there. Um, I don't think that's super valid unless you're just not installing any plugins, which nobody ever does. Everybody installs plugins in VS Code. They install plugins in NeoVim too. So I think you'll end up in the same boat. But VS Code consumes a lot of resources, CPU, power, battery, and RAM compared to NeoVim. Haha, just wait till you try Visual Studio or JetBrains. If you think these two are bad, try those. It does not give productivity to day-to-day life. Not when you're starting out. But over time, as you get better at it, it really does. It makes a difference, and it starts to feel a lot better. Even today, when I use VS Code, especially for large projects, it consumes lots of resources and gives me headaches. Again, try IntelliJ or Visual Studio. Each year, a new IDE appears. For example, Zed, Lapis, Fleet. Zed might be an interesting one to try. I might try that one if Windows support lands or Linux support. I don't know if Linux support exists yet. It might, but NeoVim does not only compete with new IDE, but also with old IDE like VS Code, etc. In the current situation, the future is dark. Okay. I know NeoVim built a strong cult around a developer. Lots of developers switch back to VS Code. I think it's fair to, like, you start in Vim, you get frustrated, you go back to VS Code, and then you go back, and then there's this cycle that happens for a little while, and then once you'll hit that point where you're like, oh, I get it, and then from then on you'll be like, I don't need that other one anymore. A lot of online IDEs provide VS Code or similar functionality. You can use Mosh and then get even more flexibility than online IDEs. Or, I mean, SSH. I like Mosh just because connectivity can be bad. But GitHub also offers inbuilt VS Code. I mean, you can do the same thing. You can open any repository with online VS Code. And with a $5 additional Ocean droplet, you can do it much cheaper than Codespaces can. Codespaces, if you want any of that compute, you're gonna need to pay for it. And I'd argue that going the SSH route leaves even more resources on a low power machine. So $5 a month, you can develop on a box in the cloud, or you can develop on a server in your closet, your old gaming computer, across the world, whatever. It's all just shell access. So the whole IDE in the browser thing is weird to me now. I used to like it. I used to think it was cool. But if you can do the same thing over SSH, why reinvent the wheel? Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, but so GitHub also offers inbuilt VS Code. You can open any repository online with VS Code. Yeah. Okay. I didn't get. I wanted more, as far as like the ending as to. I guess we got the reasons why he switched away. We didn't get the reasons why he switched to it, which I would have liked to have gotten that part of the journey as well. Like I said, I had those issues where I was I felt like I could be faster, and just the regular default motions where like control and the arrow keys, and like I'm moving my hands all over the place, and like it just wasn't, and using like home and end keys, it wasn't as efficient as I felt like it could be. And then eventually I just switched over, and I really like it. I don't have any other motions or anything that I wish I had now. I can just do it. I can just go someplace without touching my mouse, which is great. So, um, but it's really interesting overall. I liked the article. I felt like I wanted a little more, like I said, on that element. I wanted a little more conclusion, but it's good. It's good. You should go follow. You should go follow him. Rajiv Singh on Twitter if you feel so inclined. But this was a good article overall. All right. If you liked the video, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below if you think I'm wrong or if you think I'm right. Have a good day. That one was pretty long compared to the other one. So that one's a good like 35 minutes. So more like 30 minutes. So my throat's getting scratchy from talking so much. I'm not used to it. Let's do one more. Let's do one more, shall we? What should we do? So with this one, we need to move to finished. Okay. Nah, that one everybody else did. I won't be able to add anything to it. Why it's a bad idea to check the result of malloc call with assert. This one was one I was interested in reading. Let's do this one. That's not right. There we go. This one's pretty short too. All right. Okay. Let's do another marker. Okay. Why it's a bad idea to check the result of malloc call with assert by Andrei Karpov. Okay. The pointer returned by malloc needs to be checked before use. The assert macro to check the pointer would be wrong. Using the assert macro to check the pointer would be wrong. In this article, we'll investigate why this is a bad programming tip. Okay, so I don't have a ton of experience with C++, but this looks, intuitively, this looks good. Because, like, if you fail to allocate memory, you should exit your program. That makes complete sense. If you're out of memory, you should just crash, in my mind. I feel like that would make the most sense, because you just can't do anything. But let's read why my assumption there, why my gut is wrong. When I say malloc, I mean not only this function, but also calloc, realloc, align malloc, realloc, stirdup, and so on. The malloc function returns a null pointer if it's unable to allocate a memory buffer of the specified size. So it's better to check if a pointer is equal to null before dereferencing it. Why this check is mandatory, I've covered it with details in the article. 4 reasons to check what the malloc function returned. If you have the slightest doubt that such a check is necessary, please read the article before continuing this one. Yeah, no, I think that's personally, I think that's pretty obvious. I think if you get into a situation where your malloc failed, something is wrong, and you need to handle it somehow, and your pointer might be bad, and so before you just start operating on the thing and it's null, I think you should definitely do that. And I think that there's like all sorts of like undefined behavior. I might be wrong, but I think there's like undefined behavior at that point, and there could be some garbage memory there if it fails to allocate, and then it still gives you a pointer. Well, no. I guess it gives you the null pointer, so none of that would happen. But anyway, the standard check looks like this: int pointer malloc size of whatever, if not pointer, handling memory allocation error. Yeah, I'm very interested in like how to handle that. That probably differs program to program, but I prefer explicit comparison though. It protects the code from typos and makes it a lot more readable, and it's obvious that the pointer is being checked if pointer equal null. That's a style issue. I think this is fine. Personally, I don't think you need to double check that it's null. I think if not pointer makes sense, because 0 and yeah, I think that's fine. But to each their own. The most important thing to do is to handle memory allocation error. The error may appear as follows: a program terminates with a result code if such behavior is allowed. That's probably what I would do most of the time. An operation is rejected, but the program continues working to save the data. That could be good. You could do a recovery of the data. I mean, with what memory you have left, you might have to like figure out how to dealloc some stuff before you can realloc what you need to do to dump that into a file. So that may get interesting. If the program controls a device, it shuts down the device. If the behavior is allowed, that'd be good too. If the library should return a failure status and the program will decide what to do next. Yep, that's a good one. Other options depending on the type of the program. Okay, I think this is what most things are going to choose. So let's not assume that we can skip the check, because the program will crash anyway if a null pointer is dereferenced. It may not crash. Null pointer dereference is undefined behavior, and its signs can be very surprising to a programmer. I've covered all of this in the article I mentioned before. If it's undefined behavior, you can get into situations where like it'll start overwriting stack memory and heap memory, and you can get into weird scenarios. So you should handle it. I don't think it's a good idea not to handle it. Now let's discuss the following anti-pattern. This is a lot less code. This is nice. I like it. I like the assert. Some programmers use the assert macros or its analogs. I can't talk. Such as the assert macro from the MFC library to check the pointer. Please note that if the ndebug macro is declared, the assert macro turns off, does nothing. For example, implementation from assert.h. It's interesting that it does that. I wonder why that is. I wonder if that's for like production. Oh, and debug. Yeah. I bet it's for when you're not debugging, then the assert turns off and then your program doesn't exit. Which actually, okay, I see it now. I see it. If your program stays running in production with an out of memory error while using assert, and your assert gets compiled out of there, you can get into a situation where you corrupt memory. That's not good. that's not good. Because of the way your program behaves, something wouldn't save, something wouldn't work right, things wouldn't get closed, and then your program would exit, or it wouldn't exit, and you just seg fault. In reality, this means that in the release version of the program, which should run as fast as possible, the ndebug macro is declared and assert is turned into nothing. As a result, there's no protection against null pointers, and the consequence can be quite unpleasant, just like we were just talking about. In the debug version of the program, assert works as it should, but it makes no sense in real cases. Yep, we called it. Usually when developers test the debug version of a program, they use simple operation scenario that don't require large memory allocations. Most likely, severe memory fragmentation won't occur, and it's very unlikely that there will be a situation where memory allocation is impossible. Okay. If such a thing really happens, assert indeed detects a null pointer. However, this is almost useless for the debug version of the program. The null pointer dereference shows up immediately anyway. There won't be any tricky, undefined behavior issues as there are in the optimized code. Yep. So this is what we have. The assert macro doesn't work when it's supposed to in the release builds, but it works where it's of very little relevance in debug builds. What happens if you don't declare ndebug macro for release versions? This is a bad idea. Imagine your server just falling over. In fact, a memory allocation error always causes an application to crash. Such behavior is unacceptable for many types of applications, especially for libraries. Yeah, that could be bad. Your library just panics you, and or your library just causes you to seg fault. Yeah, okay. Many developers also use the same macro to implement additional checks throughout the code where it's necessary. So missing ndebug can be considered a bug, then be fixed. Just don't do that. Yep. Never be lazy to write proper crash checks, and users will be grateful. Thank you for reading. That was really good. I like that a lot. I like it a lot. So that makes a lot of sense. That would be bad if you compile out your check for errors at the end. So yeah, that makes sense. All right, I learned something. Well, if you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up. Please leave a comment. If you liked it or didn't like it, whatever. I'd like to wish everybody have a good day. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. So here's the question now. Do we do another one or do we write some code? Maybe let's do another one. We've got Golang routing enhancements. Oh, I need to move that one into finished. MBAs and the death of credentialism, AI journalism, Raspberry Pi IPO. Ooh, I wanted to read about that. I know that was a long time ago, but I still wanted to read. Oh, do I not have the link to this? Oh, yeah. It's Jeff Geerling's. Yeah. Let's do this. Let's read this. This one was good. This is that was over a month ago now, but I still think it's interesting. I wanted to read it. So let's do that one. Let me drop a marker real quick here. Oh, I forgot to mention like that I record the last two videos. I forgot to mention that I record them on stream. Oops. Uh, Start. All right. Okay. Raspberry Pi IPO Selling Out by Jeff Geerling. If you haven't checked out Jeff Geerling's stuff, by the way, his YouTube channel is really pretty good. I would highly recommend it. I'll leave a link to it in the description here. But let's read about Raspberry Pi. I think they were a nonprofit going with an IPO. So Raspberry Pi is looking into an IPO, initial public offering. Oh, that's the Bloomberg article. We'll go over there after we're done here. But wait, Raspberry Pi is a nonprofit. They can't do that? Yeah, I thought nonprofits couldn't have IPOs. And who would want to stock in Raspberry Pi anyway? Their core market hates them. They abandoned hobbyists and makers years ago. I still buy them. I still like them. And there are tons of clones, competitors. Nobody even needs a Raspberry Pi. Plus, aren't they crazy expensive? It's like $100 now, and that's even if you can find one to buy. Well, hold on a second. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. In this post, I'll walk through actually what's happening, and also the things I see online. What actually happened today? So first off, what actually happened? Well, Edmund Upton, who's the CEO of Raspberry Pi, told Bloomberg that Raspberry Pis were planning an IPO when market for IPO reopens. They're talking to banks in the UK, not the US, and that's a sticking point. Apparently, markets haven't been as kind over in the UK for IPOs. Many companies, even ARM, another Cambridge-based company, chose to list their stock on the US market instead. I didn't realize ARM was Cambridge based. I thought they were US based. I thought their parent company SoftBank was a foreign company, but I thought ARM was US based. I'm very wrong on that apparently though. Eben said the markets in London are a good enough place that Raspberry Pi would be comfortable doing an IPO there. When that happens, Raspberry Pi's ownership would be split up in the stock market as earlier private investors like Sony, ARM, and even Raspberry Pi Foundation would get large chunks of it. So it's probably like the whole OpenAI non-profit owning a for-profit thing. Like the Raspberry Pi Foundation is probably the non-profit, and then they're creating another entity underneath it. That kind of, just like OpenAI doing it, that smells a little bit. It doesn't seem quite right. But the main takeaway is being a publicly traded company creates different incentives. Much different incentives. Much different incentives. You have less control, and certain things you do are governed more by a board of directors or the public ownership at large. You can find yourself breaking a lot of laws, actually. The act of doing something that doesn't make you money breaks the law, at least in the U.S. If you're doing something that loses you money, you're breaking the law. You are required to make more money as a publicly traded company. I think that's one of the biggest problems with stocks is the companies are driven by this weird incentive structure to just keep making more and more and more. And sometimes that really makes them do dumb things that they know in the long term aren't going to be good. And the direction of the control of the company is less about small team of founders and more about profit. Yes, and you kind of lose sight of your core business demographic as well. So, now, do I think Raspberry Pis are going down the toilet? No, definitely not in the short term. And the IPO still might never happen. Okay, so it's announced they might do it. They're thinking about it. basically. Back in late 2021, there were rumors flying about an IPO, but that didn't pan out, and probably a good thing since Raspberry Pi had trouble even making their tiny single board computers for a few years. Yeah, they had supply chain issues along with everyone else, and they weren't big enough to really ride out that storm. But to be fair, neither was like Nvidia and AMD. Like Nvidia got hit hard there. They were making, they got hit hard. They couldn't keep product on the shelves, which is a really good problem to have. If you're selling everything and anything that you make, and it's just flying off the shelves, that's a good problem to have. So don't discount that. They weren't hurting at that point. They were having a good time. Back in late 2021, oh yeah, we read that. But regardless, the fact that Raspberry Pi is turning more corporate means changes will happen one way or another. I think for many of us who followed along the first few years when the first Pi was hacked together and brand new, it's the death of that original ragtag idea that hurts. It's the same OpenAI story all over again. Right now, Eben Upton is still CEO, and in an interview with the Register, he even said, "We'll keep doing the same stuff, certainly while I'm in charge. I have no reason to believe he's lying." I think a lot of times the intentions are probably good. Pre-IPO, I think the intentions are probably good, but what happens is then you get the lawyers involved, and then you like I said, you have to make money. You're required to make money if you IPO, and that leads you to do some weird things. The Compute Module 5 is right around the corner, and they could probably knock out a really cool iteration of the Pi 400 if they just put in a Pi 5 and an NVMe slot, and maybe gave us a nicer keyboard. I can dream, can't I? I heard that keyboard was really bad. I liked the Pi 400 form factor, though. I didn't have one, but I really liked the idea of it. I need a Pi 5. I have a Pi 4 that I play with a broken... It's got a broken display slot on it, but I should get a Pi 5 to play with and see how good it is. Maybe I'll subscribe to the channel. Maybe I'll do a review of the Raspberry Pi 5 when I get one. But long term, will Eben's version for what makes Raspberry Pi change? Will there be turnover and some of the people who make the Pi a joy to use be gone? Will the software side start leaning on subscriptions to increase revenue and make shareholders happy? I could see that would be the day when Raspberry Pi starts charging subscriptions for their operating system. And I could see them doing it too, because if they did that, then they'd make money off of their competitors' boards. Like, because a lot of the competitors' boards still run Raspberry, and they could make a lot of money that way. And ultimately, could Eben be replaced, and would that change things? Yes, probably, but I won't speculate about any of that here. See my blog posts about poopification. I won't. We'll skip over that. Or for the last month, if you want to read more about that topic. What I will do is answer some misconceptions I've seen about Raspberry Pi and the IPO. Misconceptions. First of all, Raspberry Pi is not a non-profit. Well, actually it is. And it isn't. Let me explain. Raspberry Pi Trading is a for-profit company in the UK that designs and manufactures all the hardware. And Raspberry Pi Foundation is a charity to help young people get into computing. If you visit their website, you'll see this mission is entirely different. Now, they are related. If you look at the foundation's governance, you'll see there are some of the same people too. Does that make the Pi Foundation shady? No. Debatable. I think if you're a nonprofit and you're in bed with a for-profit, I think, and you have the same brand, right? Like they're the same brand, like the for-profit and the nonprofit, to where people conflate the two. Like most people don't even know these are two separate companies. It's like OpenAI. Most people don't know that it's actually like 6 companies, by the way. But most people have no clue and they just, as they well should, think they're the same company, which makes it kind of disingenuous to have a for-profit and a non-profit and then mash them together. So I think that's a little weird. They do a lot of great things. They do a lot of great things. One of my favorite is the Astro Pi Challenge, where kids can get their code to run on a Pi in space. That one's definitely a neat one. But they are different entities, and they've been pretty much since the beginning. Does the foundation stand to profit from Raspberry Pi Trading's IPO? Probably. Absolutely it does. I mean, almost 10 million pounds of their 2022 income came out of Raspberry Pi Trading's profits. Yep. Yep. Mozilla's the other one. I think that they're set up a similar way too, like a non-profit owning a for-profit. Regardless, Raspberry Pi Trading, the for-profit wing, is the one that would be going public. Another thing I've heard is Raspberry Pi is too expensive now, and nobody outside of industrial customers are even buying it. I don't know what planet these people are on, but the Pi 5 has been sold exclusively to individuals for the past few months, and even every batch sells out quickly. But my estimates were almost around 500,000 Pi 5 sold already. And judging by people's posts on social media, it's not just faceless corporations and scalpers buying them all. But yes, the Pi 5 is the most expensive Pi yet. I even wrote last week about how for desktop computing it probably doesn't make much sense, especially with low-end mini PCs coming down in price. That doesn't mean that the Pi is too expensive, though. The Pi 02W is probably the absolute perfect Pi for many use cases where the Pi makes sense. That is, when you need more compute than a microcontroller but less than a desktop, and you want a board that's less than $20. Yeah, the Pi 5 is probably a lot more power hungry than the other ones. I think the microcontroller route is great if you need something that runs off like a battery. But for a desktop replacement, I don't think it's that great. Which does put the Pi 5 in a weird spot where I think the compute module makes the most sense because you're slotting it into a board that's already plugged into the wall, plugged into everything else it needs. That's probably the one that makes the most sense. So the CM4 and CM5 are best for the industrial use cases at that point, usually. There are a lot of third-party boards as well, but it's just interesting. CM4 is still selling out all the time since so many projects use it. Now, there's a nugget of truth in the accusation that Raspberry Pi sold out hobbyists and makers. They do have some responsibility there, and I think for a lot of us, myself included, it's meant spending a lot more time trying out other boards. Last year, I spent a fair bit of time on the Rock 5B and the Orange Pi 5, and I did a whole video testing the Compute Module 4 clones. But Raspberry Pi is still in a much better position, even if you're just an individual maker and even if you had to wait to buy one. They have the best... they have the software and the hardware integration both figured out, and they work really well together, and they're kind of the standard. A lot of these other boards run the same software. They endeavor to be the same as the Pi. So there's something to be said when you buy one. It's like the Apple experience. It works. It just works better that way. And if you're building a project, the last thing you want to be doing is probably fiddling around with software that doesn't work. So I think a lot of people go and buy the Pi for that reason, because the drivers are all taken care of. All of it's taken care of. It just works. Does that mean I think the Raspberry Pi will always be king? No, they might, but I keep asking, why have none of the other companies focused on things that matter in the long term, like good support for a board, even a couple years after the release? Heck, Raspberry Pi OS is still supported on the original Pi more than a decade later, which is amazing to support a Linux distribution for that long. That's pretty cool. So my Pi that sits in the back of my computer, I need to pull it out. My original Pi will still work, and that's awesome. But what kind of support, or that kind of support earns loyalty, and community support like what Armbian does for some boards is awesome. It just doesn't mean the same thing. Another thing I see is the refrain that Raspberry Pi was once open source, but now they're not, or that open source nature was their only competitive advantage. First of all, they were never open source, at least the hardware. They couldn't be because they're licensing from ARM. Um, they do have a more open nature to them, but you can't just grab their RPi 2040 design and fab your own chip. And don't get me started on Broadcom's chips. Broadcom's chips are like, Broadcom is one of those patent troll companies, which makes, I don't want to get into it too far, but that's what makes me worried about VMware and Broadcom. I think long term things go to Broadcom to die, kind of similar to Oracle. But anyway, I don't begrudge hardware manufacturers, and I would love to see more true open source hardware. But even if you love Rockchip and ESP32 devices, you have to realize that all these hardware manufacturers have proprietary bits somewhere in their stack. The more open, the better, but I won't hold my breath and wait for 100% open source hardware rolling out to a competitive single board computer design. I think RISC-V is the best bet at us getting a fully open source solution, but we're not there yet. Not even close. So summary. So a Raspberry Pi IPO, I'm disappointed but not surprised. And there's always the possibility more money and public markets make things better. But that'd be a pretty optimistic take and would be counter to all my instincts seeing other IPOs over the years. I don't think this changes anything in the short term, and the IPO would definitely change the character of Raspberry Pi. But there's still some hope it doesn't ultimately kill off things we love about the Pi. And heck, it just extends the opportunity for any of Raspberry Pi's competition to do better. I'm still waiting for a true Raspberry Pi killer, but until then, I'm happy using the Pi in my projects. I agree. I think there are pluses and minuses to this. The IPO thing is a lot more cash to be pushed into the company to make more innovations, and that's what stocks are supposed to be for. Stocks are supposed to fund R&D divisions basically entirely. Like, you're supposed to buy stock in a company to invest in their R&D, and then that company uses that money to start building bigger, better, greater things. And then that, by extension, increases profit because they're offering a better product. That is the ideal. That's the utopia view or whatever. But I've seen so many companies go IPO, or they start, like, the press messages coming from Raspberry Pi are going to change if they IPO. They're not going to be as transparent about everything if they come forward and do this. Employees aren't going to be allowed to say things anymore because it's going to violate the IPO laws, or the stockholder laws, and the publicly traded company laws rather. I think it's going to make that brand worse. I think it's going to be an influx for the technology division, and I think if they're true to their vision, the technology side of it, the engineering side of it will be good and will progress, but the public image will change. And I think that's where they're going to need to be careful, and one of these other companies could swoop in, especially if it's RISC-V based. If there's a fully RISC-V open source based competitor where everything is open, you can go hack on your own processor and then print out your own board and send it to a fab or whatever. I think that's going to be their downfall. And because of the IPO, I think they're going to be forced to hold on to intellectual property even more. I think they're going to have to in order to try to gain that competitive advantage. And I think they're going to be unable to do so. So I think if I had to bet, if I had to bet money, I think this is the first nail in the coffin, so to speak. I don't think they're quite, well, maybe not nail in the coffin. Maybe that's a little too far. I don't think they're dead yet, but I think they're going to have some challenges to overcome. And I think it's a distinct possibility that this changes the narrative over the next 10 years and the company loses their way. I think it happens a lot with IPOs, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope that doesn't happen. And I hope to be buying pies into the future, and I hope they're good and they just keep getting better and better. That's my hope. So if you liked the video, press the like button, hit the subscribe button for more videos like this. We record these starting 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time over on my Twitch channel, Twitch TV/MPsych. If you want to see my other videos, check out the channel. Everybody have a good evening. Everybody have a good one. There we go. I almost hit stop streaming. Whoops. That's not right. We're not there yet. I mean, actually, I might be. I might jump off here now. But, yeah. So that's 4 videos in the can.